Biscayne National Park. This sprawling oasis on the east coast of Florida is home to one of the most unique marine environments in the United States, captivating the 500,000 visitors arriving to the park every year. But a team of underwater archaeologists from the National Park Service is here for an entirely different reason. With help from Diving with a Purpose, a group of volunteers devoted to sharing underwater archaeology with the public. They're on the hunt to solve a mystery 2 centuries in the making. Nestled between the coral reefs of this tropical paradise, there lies 2 ancient shipwrecks. Time capsules from one of the most brutal periods in world history, the transatlantic slave trade.
The American history that most of us know or hear about or get exposed to or get taught in schools is very limited. The African American history has this added burden, combination of omission, misunderstanding, and misrepresentation. But no matter who we are, it's our birthright. We should know how we came to be.
You have the Einsteins and the Aristotles, the Rothschilds. They know their history. They were able to pass on legacy from generation to generation. Some estimates say 6 million, some go as high as 100 million Africans who were taken from the continent. How many of them were Rothschilds? How many of them were Einsteins, Picassos, right? So all of that legacy is lost in the bottom of the ocean. It's a stolen legacy. The hope is that we can link the people who were on that ship back to their families back in Africa.
Evidence of the pirate ship Guerrero, carrying 561 Africans destined for slavery, and the anti-slaving craft of the HMS Nimble are thought to lie somewhere in the vast waters of Biscayne National Park. But where?
Folks have been actively looking for Guerrero and Nimble for some time now, but using historic documentation to find a shipwreck is difficult. Even with the best kept records, did the person writing the log, how familiar were they with the area? So you got to think about accuracy in those records. There's copious records from Nimble. There's no records from Guerrero. Pirates don't typically keep logs of what they're doing because they're not doing stuff that they're supposed to be doing. So they don't write it down. It's tough.
With few historical records and conflicting reports, the team has to adopt a painstakingly thorough approach to ensure that no stone is left unturned.
What we're thinking is Guerrero and Nimble went down under my hand here. Okay. So we want to do as much of the area under here that could possibly harbor those shipwreck sites. So what do you think?
From Caesars Creek to the southern park boundaries, that's going to be easy 1,000 miles of survey, which means minimum, no weather days, 40 days. So we're going to need a couple boats, and then we're going to need a documentation team in case and when we do find historic sites.
This area of Florida Keys and on the other side of the Florida Straits, the coral reefs around the Bahamas are known as a ship trap. With super shallow coral reefs on both sides, it goes from 100 feet of water up to 8 feet of water in just a few hundred yards in some places along the reef track. So if you're not careful, you run aground.
We plug in the mag.
The first step is towing a magnetometer back and forth for close to 1,000 miles, waiting for the delicate instrument to detect any magnetic anomalies on the ocean floor.
Okay, forward on board.
And where there's iron, there are human artifacts. So that's where we can find anchors and cannons and cannonballs and rigging elements, all the things that might be associated with a historic shipwreck.
Once the potential sites are located, it's time to take a closer look. There are no fully intact ghost ships for the archaeologists to find at the bottom of the sea. The warm waters and centuries of storms will have deteriorated any existing wood and organic material, leaving only a small trove of artifacts hidden by coral and buried by sand. Knowing the story of the Guerrero and the Nimble will help the team pinpoint the shipwreck's locations.
To understand the story of Guerrero, the first thing you need to know is that in 1827, when this shipwreck occurred, the slave trade was illegal. Slavery still existed in the US, but Britain had outlawed the slave trade, which is a pretty high-handed and impressive declaration to make.
For the Africans aboard, the suffering was much greater than when the trade was legal. People are packed in. They would build a shelf going around where you could put in 2 layers of human bodies. You had rats biting ants, centipedes, spiders crawling all through the ship on you. And then, of course, you had thirst. Now, going without water is not something that human beings do very well. The Guerrero itself was a pirate ship that robbed the captives from yet another ship, and that was a common practice, because why go all the way to Africa and risk disease when you can rob somebody else's ship?
It was the mission of the HMS Nimble, part of the British Royal Navy, to intercept any ships destined for Cuba with illegal human cargo. On December 19, 1827, they sighted the Guerrero and quickly gave chase from the Bahamas into the Florida Keys.
So these reefs are really treacherous out here. The water goes from hundreds of feet deep to crazy shallows, just in the blink of an eye. And so as you can imagine, in the heat of battle, it's 2 ships going at each other. There was firing guns, and to top it all off, the sun was setting, the seas are rising, and Guerrero ran aground. It ran aground with such force that it knocked both the masts down.
Out of the 561 Africans on board the ship that day, 41 drowned in the hold when the Guerrero wrecked. The Nimble, fast on its tail, also ran aground in the shallow reefs, extinguishing any hope of rescue for the captured men.
The Nimble reports being able to hear the screams on board Guerrero and the sounds of the ship coming apart on the reef. And the crew of the Nimble spent the night trying to get free of the reef. They managed to do so by throwing heavy items, ordnance and ballast overboard. On 2 different occasions, they floated up, grounded again, offloaded more cargo and ballast, floated up, and grounded a 3rd time, ultimately about 2.5 miles away from where the 2 had sunk initially.
Data from the magnetometer reveals a potential Nimble site at an area known as Jordan's Ballast, and the divers are ready for a first-hand look.
Let's go do science.
We're looking for a grounding site where Nimble struck the reef a couple times, but then eventually it was floated off. So we would be looking for their ballast, for ordnance, for cannonballs, for just the heaviest, densest things that they could throw overboard quickly and get themselves back on the water floating. We had about 40 different pins out that we wanted to investigate. We systematically uncover the sand, the coral, and see what is there and how we can document it. When I first dove on it, I'm looking around and it's sandy and there's a few things scattered, but there's nothing here. But the data says otherwise. So we started running metal detectors underwater. It starts off as, okay, there's a round thing. Is it a coral? No, that's a cannonball. And suddenly we are uncovering an entire cache of ordnance, of cannonballs, as well as bar shot. And so if you can imagine, everyone's shouting and getting really excited. We selected a few artifacts to recover and bring up to the lab.
We're finished with the surface collection. Multiple size, different caliber cannonballs in there, and a few other items. So when they get up, I'll give you a tug on the line when it's ready to come up, and then make sure they get in a bucket of water, all right?
Roger.
You can imagine anytime you bring an artifact up that's been submerged for possibly 100 or more years, it's going to have salt in it, it's going to be completely saturated, and so you need to take care of it.
Nice sized cannonball. Looks like there's some other concretions and things attached. But right now we're just gonna keep it in salt water.
So in total, we find 26 cannonballs, a number of bar shot of different lengths. It was quite remarkable because it's all in one spot. And so you can pretty easily picture someone on the deck of a ship who's just run aground in this very shallow reef area, having a giant container of heavy metal artifacts, cannonballs, bar shot, things they want to have ready at a moment's notice, and chucking it overboard.
Most of this stuff came up out of the northern hit of the two, which turned out to be a dump of a significant amount of ordnance.
You have several pieces of solid shot, so all of these individual balls are likely solid shot. So that would have been just regular projectiles, iron balls that would have came out of the cannon. So this is exactly what you think of when you think of a cannonball. It is a large, round piece of iron, and all of the stuff that you can actually see some of the discoloration on it, it's basically rusting. It's the corrosion byproduct that's formed over time as this cannonball has sat on the bottom of the ocean for a significant amount of time. The two longer pieces though are interesting, and that's known as bar shot, and there's actually two different types here. So the one that has the balls on either end is actually called double-headed bar shot, and the other one is just a regular bar shot. It looks more like a barbell. So this is typical for bar shot. It's literally just the cannonball split in half, and so you can actually see two half spears on either end, whereas that guy is a piece of double-ended or double-headed bar shot. So in comparison, there's an entire cannonball on the end of that.
Is there any difference in the way that this would sail or what it would accomplish?
No, pretty much what it was meant to do was when it came out of the cannon, it would tumble end over end and hit things and just bounce around deck. And it was primarily meant to eliminate personnel and take out rigging.
Any particular reason why you have both kinds in the same
That's
place?
a good question. I do know that historically, when you look at the ordnance on vessels, they did differentiate between the two types. But, you know, if we're talking about a naval vessel, they're usually pretty particular on what they carry. This isn't necessarily a naval vessel. It may be, in fact, another vessel. It may be a pirated vessel, so they may just be taking what they have.
And the discoveries just keep on coming. Days later, a collection of artifacts is found a mere 1,500 feet away from Jordan's ballast, at a site known as the Straits of Florida. Could these relics be a sign of the Guerrero? Members from Diving with a Purpose are taking a closer look.
These are different types of artifacts that are particularly diagnostic. This here is actually a piece of ceramic, and in terms of form, it looks like a seashell, but this was actually a top to something like like a tureen or something along those lines. But it's likely creamware, and we'll actually clean this up. All this coral growth and stuff will actually clean off relatively easily.
You can actually see the finish, actually. Right, those designs can help to date it as well, right? Patterns of the ceramic.
Both of these, you can kind of see a green patina, these two other artifacts, and that's because they're both made of copper.
Now, does that help to date it at all, or are they pretty much made the same?
Because this was invented in about the 1780s, the use of copper on vessels, we know that this vessel was at least built or refitted sometime after 1780.
Now, is that the whole piece, or is it broken?
This is interesting because it is broken. What I believe this is something called a fish plate or a gripe plate, and it's a specific type of fastener that's used down along the keel, so the very bottom, the backbone of the vessel. And here's an example of how that particular fastener is used on a ship. And what this tells us is that whatever vessel hit here hit relatively hard and at minimum ripped its keel out. It's more likely, in addition with all the stuff that we found on site, this is emblematic of that there is an entire wreck here.
The cannonball finds at Jordan's Ballast point to a possible grounding site for the Nimble. But where is the Guerrero's final resting place?
During the night that the wreck occurred, wreckers, Florida Keys entrepreneurs who made their money salvaging ships that wrecked on the reef, they were able to see and hear the battle action and estimated that it was about 10 miles to the north, which puts it pretty close to inside Biscayne National Park.
And in the morning, 3 wrecker ships headed over trying to assist Nimble and trying to offload Guerrero. And the Guerrero captain was no fool and promptly hijacked 2 of the wrecker ships, loaded as much of his human cargo as he could, and tailed it to Cuba. He made a complete escape, as did almost all of his men.
Upon arrival, the pirate crew was able to unload its illegal cargo to the highest bidder, sentencing hundreds of men and women to a life of slavery in the sun-drenched sugar plantations of Cuba.
It was estimated that a quote-unquote prime male slave, 15 to 25 years old, would literally be worked to death in 9 years' time on average. And it was not economically profitable for plantation owners to rely on just procreation and reproduction. You just had to constantly be replacing those who died.
But not all of the Africans aboard the Guerrero were destined for a life of slavery and early death. During the morning rescue mission of the Guerrero, one ship, the Florida, was able to safely deliver 121 free Africans to the shores of the United States, where they would live for the next 3 years working to buy their way back to Africa, in conditions tantamount to slavery. In the end, the U.S. government provided the necessary funds to transport the surviving 95 Africans to a free colony in Liberia. From the 561 souls held against their will in the holds of the Guerrero, only 95 would make it back across the Atlantic. And even then, they weren't returned to their home countries.
Those people who, at the end of the whole saga, stepped on African soil in Liberia had been aboard something like 7 or 8 different ships in this whole saga. Nothing prepares you for this. How did you survive?
The archaeologists hope that by identifying the Guerrero wreck site, they can bring closure and a new link to the past. But first, they have to find it. The fish plate and copper artifacts found in the large debris scatter at the Straits of Florida reveal signs of a total shipwreck.
In this part of the world, wooden shipwrecks don't survive. It's not like the Baltic. The Baltic and the Great Lakes are all, it's low salinity, low oxygen environments. They preserve organics very, very well. Whereas out here, it's high salinity, we've got tornado worms, we've got hurricanes. The reefs basically act to crunch up the wrecks, and they deteriorate if they're not buried.
The team is hoping to find more evidence of the elusive ship on the last day of their 6-week mission.
Too much hose? Too much hose. Reeling it in. But we don't know a whole lot about this site. Because there's a very light layer of sediment covering a lot of the stuff that's right in that sand patch. That's kind of what we're curious about. We're uncovering just basically just a little bit of the sediment to see what's there. Fired up.
This site has a lot of different pieces on it. It's got rigging elements, it has things that would be associated with the ship construction itself, so big scatter. What we're doing right now is we're running an underwater dredge over the site. What we're doing with that dredge is we're pulling up the spoil from it, what's coming out of the back end of the vacuum, and screening it through a 1/4-inch mesh, and that lets us find the really small pieces. Small bits of copper tacks and copper nails, and even small pieces of what might have been the copper sheathing around the whole structure of the boat. This can be really useful because it can help us give a rough date. Copper was only used for a certain period of time in ship construction, and so we can use that to start getting a glimpse of what era we might be looking at.
As the team meticulously scours the ocean floor for small parts that could have belonged to the Guerrero, the coral offers up a once-in-a-lifetime discovery.
It felt something that was curved. It had the coloration kind of starting to be a little orange, maybe some rust, and it definitely wasn't coral.
And as we uncovered it, we realized it's a carronade, which is a small, short cannon. Of course, this is a huge find. We have a couple gun experts on the site with us, and so the first, just initial glance, was early 1800s.
The 4 to 5 foot carronade has been sitting in this spot, still loaded, for nearly 2 centuries. And due to its extreme weight of over 1,500 pounds, it'll remain there for the foreseeable future. The find, however, is a confirmation that the search for the Guerrero is on the right track.
Confidently saying that we've found Guerrero or we found Nimble is complicated. There are many wrecks from the same time period that display things that could be from Nimble or could be from Guerrero. We have to look at the handful of artifacts that have been collected, and after they've been cleaned and conserved, there may be some more evidence.
The idea of archaeology is that we're able to refine history. You have to realize that the people who were enslaved on these ships, their history wasn't written down. Their history is almost erased in many senses. And so we're bringing it to life right now. And that, I think, is the most important thing that we can be doing, is telling their story.
When you're in the water, you believe